Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Shipp, and I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Applied Science and Engineering at the University of Toronto, and really happy to be here in Calgary on a clear and smokeless day. I think this was amazing. I flew in yesterday and had an absolutely phenomenal day up in Canmore, visiting alums and just getting a chance to see what Alberta's all about. And this is it's been a fun couple of days. Great to be back in Calgary to continue the speaker series. The last time I think we were here, and I'm looking at Sonia and others who were here, was in there you are over there, was in 2018, I think, right? So just before everything kind of went sideways on us. So I'm really glad that we're back here, a chance to see familiar faces and to meet new ones as well. Also like to take this opportunity, I'm sorry if I'm talking to this mic and it's breaking up on me, but I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge that we're gathered today on the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 in southern Alberta. The nations of the Treaty 7 region are the Siksika, Piikani, Kainai First Nations, who together form the Seagate, Sitapi, Blackfoot Confederacy, the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations, who together form the Nakota, Wikistabi, Stoney Nakota First Nations, and the Sioux First Nation. Calgary is also homeland to the Northwest Métis and the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. And since this session will be broadcast in Toronto as well, I want to encourage us to reflect on the land in which the University of Toronto itself operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, these meeting places are still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. Many of us have studied on and benefited from this land. I invite you to join me in a moment of gratitude for its keepers, past and present. Acknowledge the truths of Canada's history, realizing this history minimized and harmed Indigenous peoples and has held back the nation-to-nation relationship in this country. There are 26 residential schools located in what we know as Alberta today, and the last one closed in 1990. And so we come together today to discuss sustainability and reform founded educational systems. I'll be learning from history and asking how the transition to global sustainability will advance rather than harm Indigenous communities. For the reasons I just mentioned, when it came time to name the goal of our faculty's recently launched Defy Gravity campaign, we chose not just sustainability, but actually the broader context of the creation of sustainable and thriving global communities. Climate change and environmental integrity are among the defining issues of our time. It'll take a collective effort to slow its progression. This means new sustainable technologies, but also new business models and social structures, working across Canada and indeed around the world. In this way, we're building a really long, super long history, legacy, because it marks the 150th anniversary of U of T engineering, April 1st. And it was not April Fool's joke, even though our students picked April 1st as the day and they kind of pushed the faculty a little bit. We conceded to the students, as we should. On April 1st, we kicked off the Defy Gravity campaign in style. Big time, yeah, Claire loved it. Gala event in downtown Toronto at the Fairmont. I'm going to say 1,400 people at the Fairmont. We took over the entire concourse level. Melanie was there, Ramin was there, a number of us were there. I think we actually closed the Fairmont down. There were faculty who only left once they literally turned the lights on and said, okay, time to go. Amazing event featuring a keynote led by Colonel Chris Hadfield, which when you think of Defy Gravity is a perfectly appropriate thing. It was 2 days before we announced Canada's next astronaut. And if you weren't able to attend, don't worry. There is indeed lots of official social media out there, as well as a lot of unofficial social media out there. So do check the intertubes for that. And lots to discover on a dedicated Engineering 150th website, which you can visit at ufteng.ca 150. And I think we've got the videos queued up, is that right, to play? So I'm not sure who hits the button. Jay hits the button to cue the video that was screened at that event. So please take a look.
that my most important contribution was, in fact, being there.
Over the years, I've come to realize how impactful and influential AI is as a technology.
It was amazing as we were going back over 150 years to see what U of T engineering has done to really lay the foundations for the next 150 years of discovery and innovation. Over the course of the campaign, we aimed to accelerate research to address environmental issues, including climate change, as well as new partnerships to bolster sustainability, and also think a little bit about how we train the next generation of engineers and innovators. Could certainly not do this without the support of our generous alumni and donors. So thank you for being here today, and thank you for your continued support of the faculty and vision. So many of our U of T researchers are really pushing the frontiers on new technologies. Everything from new ways to upgrade captured carbon, new energy currencies, or reimagining the grid. And of course, we're not doing this alone. It's Professor Dave Sinton in our Mechanical and Industrial Engineering Department said he's the academic director of the U of T's Climate Positive Energy Initiative. Sustainability really is an everybody problem. U of T is really an amazing place. So many rich partnerships that just stretch across the faculty, but across multiple faculties, industry and government, and that collaborative spirit certainly is exhibited here tonight. Acknowledge my colleague, Dean Melanie Wooden from the Faculty of Arts and Science, Professor Amin Farnood, the chair of ChemEng, my home department, so I have to give a shout to that. We're delighted to talk with you later tonight. And our distinguished panel tonight as well reflects that collaborative spirit. We've got graduates from engineering, arts and science, and Rotman, and this really is part of this long-standing theme for the Disruptors and Dilemmas speaker series, that by working together, we can develop and produce solutions to meet the biggest challenges of our time and build a cleaner and greener future for all of us. So in a moment, you're going to hear from Claire Kennedy, a U of T engineering graduate who founded this series more than a decade ago. I was looking at Michael. This is, I get to say the word decade again. And has continued to expand its vision to meet the changing needs of our alumni. Claire, past chair of the U of T's Governing Council and one of the co-chairs of U of T's Defy Gravity campaign. I want to thank Claire and everyone else who's made tonight possible, including the Disruptors and Dilemmas Committee and our presenting sponsor, Bennett Jones, for this amazing space, actually, and their continued support. So without further ado, let me introduce Claire Kennedy. Claire.
Thank you, Chris. I'm going to put my mic on here and hope that that works. Let me add to Chris's welcome. It's great to see a full room here. I think we're going to have a really interesting conversation. I have to say, watching that video, though, that I was struck by how vibrant and energetic engineering is. I think 150 is the new 25. As I said, I'm really pleased to be moderating this discussion tonight with fellow U of T alumni Tony Olicino, Dan Balaban, and Audrey Mascarenas as we talk about Canadians powering the transition to global sustainability. And we are delighted to be here in person in Calgary this evening, and we're taping this panel, as Chris indicated, to share with our broader U of T community at a later date. We do invite you, our audience members here, to ask the panel questions through the event, throughout the event via the QR code, which was posted at the registration desk. And I think we will be able to get up on the screen at some point. And I am going to be able to receive those questions right here, so can weave them into the conversation. So when Jay has a moment, he'll get the QR code up on the screen. As some of our audience and our viewers are aware, Disruptors and Dilemmas is originally a networking and speaker series from the Faculty of Applied Science and Engineering. And as Chris has already alluded to, one of the many things that U of T excels at is interdisciplinary studies, and Disruptors and Dilemmas is no exception. So tonight, Disruptors and Dilemmas is brought to you as a special collaboration between U of T Engineering, the Faculty of Arts and Science, and the Rotman School of Management. Now, let's jump into our conversation following just brief introductions of our panelists. I absolutely will not be able to do their bios justice, so I warn you that in advance. Tony Alicino, to my right, is the Chief Financial Officer of CES Energy Solutions, a publicly listed company that provides technically advanced consumable chemical solutions for the oil and gas industry and has operations in Canada and the United States. Welcome, Tony. He's a graduate of U of T's Faculty of Applied Science and Engineering, where he earned his mechanical engineering degree, and the Rotman School of Management, where he earned his MBA, so a double header from U of T. Prior to joining CES, Tony spent 18 years as Managing Director of Investment Banking at Scotiabank, where he worked with many other Rotman alumni. And then I think, Tony, you said about 11 years ago, you and your wife came out to Calgary, and you and your family have been here ever since. Tony has been very generous with his time as a speaker at events like this by meeting with prospective Rotman students and as a mentor for young alumni. So thank you and welcome, Tony. Dan Balaban is the CEO and Executive Chair of Greengate Power, a leader in the energy transition. To date, Greengate has successfully developed over 1 gigawatt of operating and in-construction renewable energy projects in Canada, including the largest wind energy and solar energy projects in Canada. Prior to Greengate, Dan worked in management consulting and was the co-founder, president, and CEO of Roughneck.ca, Inc., a leading provider of software solutions for the oil and gas industry. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science from the University of Toronto and spent 9 years on the board of the Pembina Institute, a Canadian think tank, which many of you will know. Welcome, Dan. Audrey Mascarenhas is no stranger to U of T Engineering or to the Disruptors and Dilemmas series, a longtime friend of the faculty. She's appeared on previous alumni panels in Calgary and including on D&D's predecessor called Biz School. She's also a 2022 recipient of the Engineering Alumni Network Hall of Distinction recognition. Audrey's worked for over 35 years in energy and clean tech and is the president and CEO of Questor Technology, a clean tech company committed to developing technology to improve the environment and our communities. Audrey has a BASc in chemical engineering from the University of Toronto and a master's degree in petroleum engineering from right here at the University of Calgary. She currently chairs the Canadian federal government Clean Technology Strategy Table. I don't know how you do it all, Audrey, and she's flown in, just taken a break from her vacation, flown in just to do this panel. So thank you so very much and welcome. Okay, let's jump right into our conversation. The theme of our panel today is Canadians powering the transition to global sustainability. And sustainability, I think, is very much on people's minds and you know, in our thoughts and in op-eds, in conversations. I want to ask each of you about the role that your firm plays in this sustainability journey and what you see as big challenges as well as opportunities ahead of us. Why don't I start with you, Dan?
Well, thank you very much for having me. You know, back in the mid-90s when I spent my Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday at the Brunswick House, and then the next day with my head down in Laidlaw Library or in the computer lab in the engineering annex. Never thought I'd be invited to be on a panel for U of T, but thank you for thank you for having me. So I'm the CEO of a company called Greengate Power, and what we do is we develop large-scale renewable energy projects. And if I have to describe what that is you know, we take an idea for a renewable energy project and put the capital and work into it for several years till it's ready for investments and construction, investment by large institutional investors and bringing debt financing. It's quite a complicated process to package up these projects. But you know, what we've done is we've successfully developed, you know, as you said, the largest, what was at the time, largest wind farm in the country, which we developed and sold at the start of construction to, that one was to Enbridge and EDF, a big French utility. Most recently, we just completed construction on the largest solar farm in the country, which we developed. We brought in a big Danish fund. It was their first investment in Canada, and Amazon is buying the power. And then, subsequent to Amazon making the announcement to buy the power from our project, they announced the single largest tech investment in our province's history, a new data center, multi-billion-dollar data center they're building just outside of Calgary. So, I see, renewable energy and economic development going hand in hand. Started the company more than 16 years ago here in Calgary, the heart of oil country. It's not the easiest place to be doing trailblazing, precedent-setting renewable energy projects. But we do have a lot of good things going for us in Alberta. It's really well known that we've got phenomenal fossil fuel resources. These towers that we see around us were largely built on the back of that industry. But we also have phenomenal renewable energy resources. We have some of the best solar in the world, or in Canada, some of the best onshore wind in the world. And it's a really good place to produce renewable energy. And, I see the world going through an energy transition, as we all know. And the way I describe it is we're moving from burning molecules to producing clean electrons as our primary source of energy. We need more and more of these big projects in order to meet our net zero objectives, in order to meet our climate goals. But in the meantime, the world's still using oil and gas. We see that. The war in Ukraine has, highlighted energy security as a, really important issue. So it's not as simple as just going to net zero. There's people's, lives that are impacted by this. But at the end of the day, I believe we should be pursuing our renewable energy resources. But as long as as the world continues to use oil and gas, I see no reason why it shouldn't be Alberta oil and gas, among the most responsibly produced in the world. And I think we can have both. And I've been trying to share a message of collaboration, one of moving past the polarization that we seem to be having in this discussion, because I don't think it serves anybody. I think climate change is an important issue, energy security is an important issue, economic diversification is an important issue, and we can deal with all of them.
Great. Lots to chew on there. I sure will circle back to some of the themes that you've raised, Dan. Audrey, over to you.
So one of the things I do is I keep my bio the same. So I've actually spent over 45 years being passionate about energy. And I spent the first 20 years of my career working for a big oil and gas company. And I've spent 25 years at Questor trying to be this agent of change to help deal with emissions. So the role that Questor plays is we've got technology that allows us to take any waste stream, make sure that it is cleanly combusted, and turned to CO2. Now you may say, wait a minute, CO2. But what people are missing is there's a lot of other gases that have a significant impact on global warming. And of course, I always joke and say I've been working on methane for so long that I've changed my middle name. Methane is actually 86 times worse than CO2 over a 20-year period. It appears in everything we do, whether it's the oil and gas industry, whether it's agriculture, landfills, wastewater treatment. It is one of our low-hanging fruit opportunities to stop this temperature rise in the next 20 years. So that's one part of what I've been passionate about. And I started that journey because when I was working in oil and gas, I saw so many flares. I put in flares. I was at sites where they were black and smoky. So not only were we wasting energy, but we were adding all these pollutants into the atmosphere because it's not a clean way to deal with waste gas. The other opportunity, I think, in energy transition that we have is energy efficiency. What a lot of people don't know is for every barrel of oil that we go to use, we're actually only using 40% of the energy, or 35 to 40% of the energy. We waste 65% of it as heat. So the other technology that Questor has been very passionate about is how can we change this low-grade waste heat to power? And the beauty of doing that is changing it to power. This is clean power. It's zero emissions. We don't have the challenges of, is the wind blowing or is the sun shining? And every single one of our industrial processes has waste heat. So the combination of getting rid of methane, turning it to CO2, even though that sounds counterintuitive, but that and looking for energy efficiency is one of the two things that will give us the chance in the next 20 years to actually stop this temperature rise. But the sad part of it is we're not even talking about it. We're just starting to talk about it. And so as we go through this discussion, I'm really hoping that we get a chance to talk about what are the low-hanging fruit, easy things we can do. So for $3.6 billion, we could reduce our greenhouse gas emissions 1 gigaton, but not only make an impact on climate change, improve air quality, we're wasting and flaring in communities where people live with zero energy. What if we took that, created power for them? We would meet all these great sustainability goals. We would stop the temperature rise. And more importantly, one of our big goals is we want everyone to have access to clean energy, and we have the ability to do that.
So energy efficiency and taking methane out. We'll come back to we'll come back to some of that. Let me go to you, Tony. Talk to us a little bit about your company's role in sustainability and what you see as challenges and opportunities.
Sure. So our mere existence is helping this world through the energy transition phase, which is a world where some people refuted it up until a few years ago, and then they regained their senses. This world consumes 100 million barrels of oil a year, and that's going to decline over time, over decades. I don't think anybody can say exactly when that's going to decline, but in the meantime, there are issues like the Ukraine war. There are issues like energy security. There are issues like the third world wanting what the first world has. And our job is pretty simple. We buy molecules from around the world. We take those molecules to our reactors and our manufacturing facilities in the US and Canada. We create new molecules, and we get these molecules and we sell them to our customers to allow them to drill for and produce oil or gas as effectively as possible. And the nice thing about that is when we do our job really well, our customers are able to do more with less. So the US is producing about 12.2 million barrels a year. Canada is north of 4 million. And the rig count in North America has gone down from probably 1,500 rigs about 4 or 5 years ago to probably closer to 800 rigs today. And they're doing the same. And the reason they're able to do the same is companies like ours and a few very large competitors are able to sell them chemistry to maximize the yield from their existing reservoirs. So that allows them to do more with less, to reduce their carbon footprint. It's stuff they love telling their stakeholders about, their boards about, their customers, their rating agencies. And we do it very well. We have 2,200 employees. We do $2.25 billion in revenue. 2/3 of that is in the US. 50% of it is production chemicals. The other 50% is drilling fluids. And those 200 engineers, technicians, chemists allow us to stay at the forefront. And why that's really interesting when we talk about opportunities, I'm the CFO. We wouldn't have 2,200 people gainfully employed and being able to send their kids to college and buy cars and houses. We wouldn't have a market cap of $700 million with investors that support us unless we were profitable. The biggest challenge that we have is avoiding chasing the shiny new greenwashing headline and making something or talking about something that's not profitable. That's not what we do. We're in the business of making money, and we're able to dovetail the expertise that we have to help our customers do more with less, assist in that energy transition for whatever number of decades it takes. And in the meantime, we get to work with innovators like people in Dan's world, directly or indirectly, that are working on carbon capture and hydrogen and designing ourselves and our chemistry into those potential new end markets for our chemicals. But make no mistake about it, we are helping our customers do what they do more efficiently, and we are assisting in the energy transition and positioning the company for the next phase, whenever that comes.
So I'm hearing a lot of, I think, sort of similarity in the themes here, the importance of innovation, the fact that we are in an energy transition, that it's not an either or, and that there's a sort of a mosaic, if I could call it that, of solutions to attack this problem of climate change. It's going to take time. It's going to take ingenuity, but it's happening, and it's happening here in Canada, and it's happening importantly here in Calgary. Audrey, I'm going to come back to you with a question. You're an innovator and an entrepreneur. You talked about starting off in a large oil and gas company and seeing those flares, installing them yourself, and you had this sort of vision that things could be done differently. So talk to us about that sort of process of innovation here in Canada.
So, like I said, I've been on this journey for 25 years. And when I started it in 1999. Now, I had tried to retire and be a stay-at-home mom. I only lasted 2 months and announced that I was going to do this startup, and I was going to care about emissions and environment. And the first thing my husband said to me was, "What?" He said, "You're turning down all these high-paying jobs in oil and gas. You're putting personal money into this startup. No one's ever going to care about emissions and environment, and the nanny's going to make more money than you. How does this make business sense?" And I said, at this point in my career, I've had an amazing career in oil and gas. I have broken all the rules. I've broken all the stereotypes. And I think that this is my opportunity to give back. So I knew I picked the road that was going to be tough. It was going to feel like I was pushing a rock up a hill. It still feels that way sometimes. But the world is finally starting to talk about emissions and methane. I believe personally, being an innovator is a hard journey in Canada. I feel that we're very opposed to change. We want to talk about it, but I don't believe in Canada that we've really set ourselves up to support innovators. We do a lot around early stage now, but we dropped the ball. And reality is, when you look at the number of companies that start these startups, their chances of getting to scale up is less than 1 to 2%. And reality is, when you get to 1 or 2% and our economy doesn't support scaling those up, and those companies get bought by other countries or other countries finance them, we actually subsidize the rest of the world's GDP, right? And so, similar to CES, a lot of our revenue is outside of Canada. So before COVID, 90% of our revenue was outside of Canada. Yet what we do is absolutely germane to our oil and gas industry being able to say that they produce a low carbon oil and gas molecule.
I've heard that before, that essentially criticism that innovators in Canada find a much harder time selling within Canada than they do without. We're going to come back to that sort of global part of the discussion. Dan, let me go to you. Audrey's talked about scale and achieving scale. So talk to us about scale in renewables. And we've got a question here from the audience talking about solar and wind projects yielding 7 to 8%, IRR, and is scale the only way to really make these investments sufficiently profitable to do?
Yeah, I mean, projects of scale are definitely more cost effective than smaller projects. Renewable energy is it's another form of energy, but it's very different than oil and gas from a business perspective. Like, oil and gas projects typically are, quicker to pay off, higher returning, but exposed to, swings in the commodity price. And Calgary, as a result, and Alberta, as a result, rides that commodity price roller coaster. But renewable energy projects are structured very differently. So they're more akin to big infrastructure projects. They are big infrastructure projects where these projects are typically structured so that well, first off, they're really long life. They operate for like 30, 35 plus years. The revenue is typically contracted with a long-term buyer, long-term off-taker, like an Amazon or a Microsoft or a big oil and gas company, or in other places around the world, government utilities. And very attractive to institutional investors, pension funds, but relatively skinny returns. Not to say that they're not profitable, they just are relatively skinny returns with a large amount of capital. So just kind of the way it's working is the investors, most of the investors that are looking to deploy capital in this space have the problem of too much capital.
Right.
I mean, I wish I had that problem, but that's the problem that pension funds have around the world.
Yeah, they need an investment big enough to make it worth their while to effectively run the due diligence and make the investment.
Yeah, it used to be we need a minimum of 100 million. Now we need a minimum of 250 or 500 million. Like these are big, these are big numbers. So you need you need these projects of scale to track the capital and bring it down to an overall cost that is makes it a compelling investment.
Right. But I think you're making the point there that there are institutional investors that are actually seeking those, I'll call it sort of utility-like returns. So relatively modest, but stable and long-lived. And the stability in that revenue stream comes from that offtake agreement. So if I understand it correctly, really where your company is playing is on the development side, because those folks with that capital don't want to take the construction risk, right? So you get the project to fruition, flip the switch, and at that point you can sell it to a larger and stable pool of capital that wants to see those returns. So
I think that's accurate. Yeah. They're very exciting projects. I think developing really renewable energy projects are a really cool thing to do. They're utilizing the latest in technology. They're significantly helping to reduce emissions, inspiring, I think, others to follow suit. But at the end of the day, it's a pretty boring investment wrapped in a very exciting blanket.
Right. I'm going to go to Tony for a question on stakeholders. I'm going to come back to you, Dan. I want to talk to you a little bit about critical minerals, and particularly the needs that we're going to have, for example, wind and rare earth-based magnets. And so I'm going to come back to you a question about that critical mineral supply, and if we're doing enough here in Canada and elsewhere to ensure that you have that supply chain for renewables. But Tony, you talked about you talked about stakeholders and stakeholder relations, and I think that's a really, really important point. Companies today have many stakeholders. They're obviously shareholders, but there are financiers, there are customers, there are employees. There's even just citizens who I think often feel themselves as stakeholders, particularly in larger enterprises. And these stakeholders, interest, views, and priorities on sustainability, I'll call it charitably, are diverse and maybe difficult to align in some cases. So talk to us a little bit about stakeholder relations and how you see that, how you go about getting buy-in from key decision makers. We've got a question here on regulation. It's a fairly technical one, so we might not have a super technical answer, but I imagine that policymakers are also an important group of stakeholders. But talk to us a little bit about your views on stakeholder relations.
So it is very diverse, but it really starts and ends with being transparent and educating them. laying it out on the line. We're a public company, and we have to provide the proper disclosure. We don't want to mislead anybody. We have our regulatory disclosure requirements. And then we go that one extra step that any successful business person does, which is you need to understand your audience. And everybody has a little bit of a different angle, but you start with the common denominator of giving them all the information. And then you try to understand what their problems are and what their hot buttons are, so you can try to help them address those. It starts with the customers. Like, without the customers, none of us would be here. We wouldn't be in this great office. That's the way it works. So we understand what they're looking to do from a sustainability perspective. We try to marry that with an economic solution, and now we have a business. And after that, we have employees, 2,200, that want to come to work. Some of them really love the industry that they're in. Some of them look for other industry opportunities. But the ones that do understand what we're doing and do support it get treated very well. And that allows the company to operate properly. And then after that, there's a whole bunch of external folks, communities that we work in. We talked about regulations. We're talking about Colorado as a market, really needing to understand what those specific requirements are by the regulatory bodies as well as citizens. We're trying to do the right thing and figure out if we could make an economic business model work, and it does. And then there's other very important stakeholders that could be the lifeline to your business: shareholders, bondholders, lenders, rating agencies. And there again, each of them have their external stakeholders. So it's our job to make their lives easier, to explain to the private equity or the portfolio managers, investors or limited partners that are involved in capital raises and investment, understanding where the pressures are coming from for the rating agencies, to tell them the story about what we're doing and why, and get them to sign on to climate and ESG related considerations as well as economic considerations. So the answer is there's no one size fits all. It's a matter of being honest about what you are and who you are, and trying to understand what the stakeholder needs are, and then cater to them by educating them.
Yeah. So really managing that through transparency and through education. So let me circle back to you, Dan. I asked you a question about critical mineral supply chain, sort of, is that or is that not kind of a gating item or a, potentially gating item for the supply, particularly of wind power?
Yeah, and it's a gating item for energy transition in general. It's a gating item for wind power, solar power, batteries, the whole electrification vision that exists for the world. It's become more complicated for sure by the geopolitical tensions that are escalating. With the West and Russia, the West and China. We at the moment China controls a lot of the supply chain that's critical to energy transition. But it is in its relatively early stages, so there's a lot more resources that need to be developed. Canada, we're fortunate. We're one of the most resource-rich countries in the world. We have a relatively low population, but we can't help but get in our own way. It's pretty. I've been in this industry for 16 years. Been observing all sorts of different things, and it's not easy, as Audrey said, to do what we do in Canada, because we are, despite talking a good game, we do not put that talk into action very effectively. And so I think in short, we have a massive opportunity in all these minerals, and that's actually quite an exciting opportunity, because renewable energy is an important thing, but it's more localized. Renewable, the renewable energy projects we build in Alberta supply the Alberta grid. We don't have a lot of ability to export power, so it's great. We should clean up the Alberta grid. But if we can be developing critical minerals, we can export those to the world, just like we can export our oil and gas to the world. I think that's actually quite an exciting opportunity.
Right. Oh, I mean, we are seeing a return to industrial policy, I think, in Canada, and the federal government has got a critical mineral strategy, and they're definitely putting money into that along the supply chain, including in batteries. We see that in Ontario with the VW plant. That's largely in response, I think, to the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act. So I'm going to stick with you, Dan, and just talk to us a little bit about that. Has that really helped advance infrastructure and technology innovation in the U.S.? And is Canada doing enough to respond and remain competitive?
So, so my company has developed projects that have attracted, more than $2 billion worth of capital. How much subsidies? How much money do you think came from the federal government for $2 billion of projects? Anyone want to take a guess? Okay, it's zero.
That's what they mean by net zero.
Yeah, net zero to me, I interpret very differently. So, so that kind of, for me, I guess, colors my view of things. And this has been, 8 years where we had, almost 8 years where we've had a government that signals, very positively in this sector. So I just think we have a lot of work to do. We're playing catch up with the IRA, the Investment Reduction Act, the United States. But a lot of the measures, like the government announced some measures in the fall economic statement in end of 2022. Mm-hmm. Then they, we're all waiting for the budget, and they re-announced it in the budget, but none of it's bankable yet.
Right.
But it's bankable in the U.S. and projects are moving ahead. That's their case in point.
Yeah, we are seeing some, I think, cross-border cooperation because Canada has been identified as a domestic source under the Defence Production Act. And recently, President Biden stopped in Australia on the way back from the G7 and announced that Australia would be as well. So I think that ought to be giving a boost to our critical minerals sector. Audrey, I'm going to put you on the spot here and ask if you can share any perspectives from the role that you have as chair of the panel, the Clean Tech Strategy panel that you're chairing for the government.
So I did chair it, and unfortunately this bio was a little old, but I would love to share some perspectives around it. So one of the reasons they put these economic strategy tables in place, and they focused on 6 segments that they believed would create growth for Canada. And one of the reasons they cared about this was we actually have had our GDP start to go down. Our productivity is the lowest out of the G7 countries. And if we don't start to figure out how to turn this around, we're not going to be able to enjoy the quality of life. So as they looked at them, and of course the one that I focused on I chaired was clean tech. And the discussion we had was, why don't we look at business in Canada in the same way that we looked at the Olympics, where we looked and we wanted to own the podium. When we focused on the athletes that we felt had a good chance of getting that medal and figured out what we needed to do to help them do that, we punched above our weight. So when we raised that as an opportunity in business to help Canada grow its GDP, the first comment they said to me was, Audrey, we can't pick winners or losers. And I said, why not? Well, in our Canadian culture, we want to be fair to everyone. And I said, well, guess what? Because we spend so much time trying to figure out and help the ones that are struggling, we actually have picked the losers, not the winners. Mm. And there was silence there, right? So it did start a conversation on, looking for the strategic firms that have an opportunity to own the podium. But the problem is we support them with a whole bunch of people that have actually never run businesses. So we are one of those firms that has been picked, but they're lost and everything takes so long. I believe if we got really focused and decided we wanted to be successful in growing companies and growing businesses, The opportunity for Canada is enormous. We have an excellent education system. We have unlimited resources. We're probably one of the luckiest countries in the world. And yet, we're not creating GDP growth and everything else. I would love us to have a different vision. What if we created these great scale-up companies that took their technology and made an impact all over the world? So for Questor, currently, according to the World Bank, every day we flare and vent over 14.5 billion standard cubic feet a day. We've been doing this for the last 60 years. By doing that, we have enormous GHG emissions. So what if we spent $3.6 billion, put 5,000 Questor Q5000s, we would reduce GHG emissions 1 gigaton a year. In other words, we would reduce these emissions at a cost of less than $1 a ton. And if I took that heat and generated power, we would solve our crisis. And yet it's not even a conversation that we're having because we're busy on moonshots. But the best part of that is we would grow our GDP, we would create great jobs for our young people, and we would change the whole conversation for Canada. We don't have a big enough market in Canada, so as we create these companies, we should be making sure we're setting themselves up to work globally, right? That is our opportunity.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And that statistic about Canada having the lowest GDP growth in the G7, I think should scare us all, frankly. Somerset Maugham once said that money is like a sixth sense. Without it, you cannot fully appreciate the other five. I think that there's actually some truth to that. And I think there's some parallels to Canada. If we want to enjoy a high standard of living, publicly accessible health care and education, that we do that contributes to our very high standard of living, we need to ensure that we have that GDP. And I think that oil and gas are going to be part of that mix for quite some time. So Tony, I want to come back to you. We've got a question here that's coming from the audience. And I think, in this room a little bit, we're, kind of preaching to the converted or singing to the choir about the fact that the energy transition is an energy transition. That we will be continuing to extract and use fossil fuels and to export them. Dan, you made that point in an op-ed in the Calgary Herald not that long ago. It's not an either or, it's an and. So Tony, what does the question is, what does the oil and gas sector need to do to sort of overcome, I think, some of the biases against them? And maybe, you've talked about education. The person with the question here mentions that the last COP was the first time that oil and gas was even invited and had a seat at the table. So what can we do to change the conversation? And maybe it is changing a little bit with the recognition of the importance of energy security following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But I think that the conversation has farther to go. How can we accelerate that conversation and that understanding in markets maybe outside Calgary?
Yeah, the audience member isn't going to like this, but what ends up happening is for people to come to their senses, they have to feel pain. We've been riding so high so long because of our natural resources and because we've lived off the backs of generations that have built this country and built these businesses, that built these buildings, that now we're just sitting on our hands. And you saw it in Europe. You look at countries like Germany that did a fantastic job during the rah-rah Al Gore renewable energy speeches that weren't economically viable back in the early 2000s. And what happened there? All of a sudden they wake up and realize, holy crap, we have a real energy problem. We're turning on coal-fired power generation. We're having issues with natural gas. We're worried about our citizens heating their houses in the winter. We're worried about people dying. We have to change the rhetoric. We can talk all we want about having the poor oil sands producers, some of the most technologically advanced producers on the planet, from many levels, technically quality, some of their emission specs, their humanitarian record compared to other countries around the world. They've tried hard, but nobody's listening. Nobody's listening because nobody's feeling pain. And I put it to leaders like you, Chris, we have to educate these younger people to understand that they need to take a balanced view. And if they don't, it's at our peril. There's a reason why 2/3 of our $2.25 billion of revenues in the U.S. There's a reason why some of it is growing in the Middle East. It's because that's where the business is. This is going to change. We're going to realize how to make money in these other markets, but you're not going to change people's opinions with commercials and billboards. The way you change it is when they realize that, oh my God, we can't afford that hospital or that school or that bridge or that road. Why is that? Well, we don't have the money to do it. And we've racked up so much debt that you're going to have a hard time living the life that you wanted to. And that's when things change. That's when they start voting for different policies and policymakers.
Right, so we got to look at our balance sheet. Spoken like a true CFO, I have to say. We're just about coming to the conclusion here. I could go on for a long time. I got a lot of questions. I know our audience does too, but we do have some refreshments, and I know it's dangerous to stand between people and refreshments for too long. And we did promise that we would wrap up close to 6 o'clock. So maybe what I'll do is I'll ask you. I'll do a speed round, and I'm going to ask you for a sort of a takeaway or a key question or thought that you would like our audience to take away from this evening. I'm going to start with you, Dan.
Of course you are. Well, I think the takeaway, I would say, is that we need all forms of energy in the world for the time being. The energy security issues that we're seeing in Europe highlight that. We can't take for granted that we're going to have undisrupted energy here, as you point out. Sometimes it takes pain, God forbid. Hopefully we don't experience the pain here. But we need all forms of energy. However, I do believe that our net zero goals are important. Climate change is not I was going to say it's not a burning issue, but maybe it is with the smoke that we've seen here. It's certainly it's something it seems to be coming down the road, but it's something I think we absolutely need to deal with. So while we need everything today, I think we need to be moving as hard as we can in the net zero direction.
Great. Audrey?
So I think we make an assumption that we've got to pick energy or environment. And we're very busy having a lot of polarizing conversations. But reality is we're about to destroy this planet in a very catastrophic way. I continue to be puzzled as we look at moonshots and things that in the next 20 years are going to have very little or zero impact. And a lot of times we're very comfortable with defying the laws of thermodynamics, comfortable that perhaps we can reverse entropy. My big fear is we will be so busy in moonshots and shiny, sexy, and forget that we have 20 years or maybe less as we look at what's happening with the fires. Because we're so busy in polarizing conversations and not actually sitting down and going, what's the easiest thing that has the biggest impact that I can do right now? And I really want us to start to think about that and have those conversations, not get busy in moonshots and shiny and sexy. And I know we had a chance to chat over lunch. My challenge to the University of Toronto is we got to change this conversation. We have to start to get to brass tacks and go, we got 20 years, what are we going to do that's going to make the impact and make sure we create a great future for our planet? Challenge accepted? Deal.
Sold. Tony?
Yeah, I would echo what both Dan and Audrey said, and so I'm not going to repeat it because I think you're hearing a common theme. What I would say is embrace what we do have. We have a great country. We have great educational institutions. We have great up-and-coming students. and professionals and hardworking, more blue-collar workers. We have it all in Canada. Let's take advantage and be excited to be able to work with companies like ours to help us through the transition, because these are going to be the future leaders. I don't believe in the doom and gloom, and maybe I'm too much of an optimist, but I do believe that everybody has their place and their contribution to make to live a good, productive life, contributing to the economy, contributing to their family, their communities, and help with the transition and come up for air, or their kids come up for air in that next generation. And yeah, the world will be different, but you can't run around just refuting the reality that there has to be a marriage between the current and the new direction that energy and energy transition is going in. And it's those minds and those brains and those voters that we're going to need to help us get there.
Great, well, thank you. I'm happy that we're actually ending on an optimistic note. I actually took a lot of optimism out of this country. Thanks in no small part to our fantastic panelists who are leading great organizations and making huge contributions. There were lots of questions that we didn't get to on nuclear power, a lot on policy, a question on net zero challenge and how your companies are fulfilling that. I'm going to invite the conversation to continue. Please do stay as long as you can. We have some refreshments, and I'm going to volunteer that you can call our panelists and continue the conversation, including the moderator. Although I could only echo the very smart things that we have heard this evening. And on behalf of the University of Toronto, I want to thank you, Tony, Audrey, and Dan, for a really rich conversation. The experiences and the insights that you shared certainly persuaded me that there is a lot of opportunity, a lot of potential in Canada. We need to do more, frankly, to realize upon it. That's going to take help from government, and it's also going to take Canadian businesses sourcing locally, and Canadian investors and Canadian consumers ensuring that we are powering our homegrown countries, allowing them to succeed here in Canada as well as in export markets. So I do want to end on that optimistic note. A few more words of thanks. Thank you to TD Insurance and to Manulife for their support of the Disruptors and Dilemmas Speaker Series through the University of Toronto Affinity Partner Program. And of course to my firm, Bennett Jones, for hosting us here this evening in Calgary. And I want to thank each and every one of you, our audience members. You contributed some great conversations and made it an even, great questions and made it an even richer conversation. And thanks to those watching online. We're so happy that you were able to join us tonight. Whether you are near or far, we're so thankful that you were able to join us as we took an in-depth look at how Canadians really are powering the transition to a more sustainable future.